And we're going to continue with the 7th chapter from the second book of A Tale of Two Cities, which is called Monsieur the Marquis in Town. And we've been in the midst of hearing a description of what it is like at the hotel where the Monsignor is holding court. And if it doesn't sound like the hotel of a certain, well, not a certain, the current president of the United States, then you are not paying close enough attention. And if it does, then you will understand why I chose this book to read to you at this time. So let us continue. Dress was one unfailing talisman and charm used for keeping all things in their places. Everybody was dressed for a fancy ball that was never to leave off, from the palace of the Tuileries through Monsignor and the whole court, through the chambers, the tribunals of justice, and all society, except the scarecrows. The fancy ball descended to the common executioner, who, in pursuance of the charm, was required to officiate, frizzled, powdered, in a gold-laced coat, pumps, and white silk stockings. At the gallows and the wheel, the axe was a rarity. Monsieur Paris, as it was, the episcopal mode among his brother professors of the provinces, Monsieur Orleans and the rest, to call him, presided in this dainty dress, and who among the company at Monsignor's reception in that 1780th year of our Lord could possibly doubt that a system roofed in a frizzled hangman, powdered, gold-laced, pumped, and white silk stockinged, would see the very stars out? Monsignor, having eased his 4 men of their burden and taken his chocolate, caused the doors of the holiest of holies to be thrown open and issued forth. Then, what submission, what cringing and fawning, what servility, what abject humiliation, as to bowing down in body and spirit! Nothing in that way was left for heaven, which may have been one among other reasons why the worshippers of Monsignor never troubled it. Bestowing a word of promise here, and a smile there, a whisper on one happy slave, and a wave of the hand on another, Monsignor affably passed through his rooms to the remote region of the circumference of truth. There Monsignor turned and came back again, and so, in due course of time, got himself shut up in his sanctuary by the chocolate sprites, and was seen no more. The show being over, the flutter in the air became quite a little storm, and the precious little bells went ringing downstairs. There was soon but one person left of all the crowd, and he, with his hat under his arm, and his snuff-box in his hand, slowly passed among the mirrors on his way out. "I devote you," said this person, stopping at the last door on his way, and turning in the direction of the sanctuary, "to the devil." With that, he shook the snuff from his fingers, as if he had shaken the dust from his feet, and quietly walked downstairs. He was a man of about 60, handsomely dressed, haughty in manner, and with a face like a fine mask, a face of transparent paleness, every feature in it clearly defined, one set expression on it. The nose, beautifully formed, otherwise was very slightly pinched at the top of each nostril. In those 2 compressions, or dints, the only little change that the face ever showed resided. They persisted in changing color sometimes, and they would be occasionally dilated and contracted by something like a faint pulsation. Then they gave a look of treachery and cruelty to the whole countenance. Examined with attention, its capacity for helping such a look was to be found in the line of the mouth, and the lines of the orbits of the eyes being much too horizontal and thin. Still, in the effect that the face made, it was a handsome face, and a remarkable one. Its owner went downstairs into the courtyard, got into his carriage, and drove away. Not many people talked with him at the reception. He stood in a little space apart, and Monsignor might have been warmer in his manner. It appeared, under the circumstances, rather agreeable to him to see the common people dispersed before his horses, and often barely escaping from being run down. His man drove, as if he were charging an enemy, and the furious recklessness of the man brought no check into the face or to the lips of the master. The complaint had sometimes made itself audible, even in that deaf city and dumb age, that in the narrow streets without footways, the fierce patrician custom of hard driving endangered and maimed the mere vulgar in a barbarous manner, but few cared enough for that to think of a second time. of it a second time, and in this manner, as in all others, the common wretches were left to get out of their difficulties as they could. With a wild rattle and clatter and inhuman abandonment of consideration not easily to be understood in these days, the carriage dashed through the streets and swept round corners, with women screaming before it, and men clutching at each other and clutching children out of its way. At last, swooping at a street corner by a fountain, one of its wheels came to a sickening little jolt. There was a loud cry from a number of voices, and the horses reared and plunged. But for the latter inconvenience, the carriage probably would not have stopped. Carriages were often known to drive on and leave their wounded behind, and why not? But the frightened valet had got down in a hurry, and there were 20 hands at the horses' bridles. "What has gone wrong?" said the monsieur, calmly looking out. A tall man in a nightcap had caught up a bundle from among the feet of the horses and laid it on the basement of the fountain, and was down in the mud and wet, howling over it like a wild animal. "Pardon, Monsieur the Marquis," said a ragged, submissive man. "It is a child." "Why does he make that abominable noise? Is it his child?" "Excuse me, Monsieur the Marquis. It is a pity, yes." The fountain was a little removed, for the street opened where it was into a space some 10 or 12 yards square, as the tall man suddenly got up from the ground and came running at the carriage. Monsieur the Marquis clapped his hand for an instant on his sword hilt. "Killed!" shrieked the man in wild desperation, extending both arms at their length above his head and staring at him. "Dead!" The people closed round and looked at the Monsieur the Marquis. There was nothing revealed by the many eyes that looked at him but watchfulness and eagerness. There was no visible menacing or anger. Neither did the people say anything after the first cry. They had been silent, and they remained so. The voice of the submissive man who had spoken was flat and tame in its extreme submission. Monsieur the Marquis ran his eyes over them all, as if they had been mere rats come out of their holes. He took out his purse. "It is extraordinary to me," he said, "that you people cannot take care of yourselves and your children. One or the other of you is forever in the way. How do I know what injury you would have done my horses? See, give him that." He threw out a gold coin for the valet to pick up, and all the heads craned forward, that all the eyes might look down on it. As it fell, the tall man called out again, with a most unearthly cry, "Dead!" He was arrested by the quick arrival of another man, for whom the rest made way. On seeing him, the miserable creature fell upon his shoulder, sobbing and crying, and pointing to the fountain where some women were stooping over the motionless bundle and moving gently about it. They were as silent, however, as the men. I know all, said the last comer. "Be a brave man, my Gaspard. It is better for the poor little plaything to die so, than to live. It has died in a moment without pain. Could it have lived an hour as happily?" "You are a philosopher, you there?" said the Marquis, smiling. "What do they call you?" "They call me Defarge." "Of what trade?" "Monsieur the Marquis, vendor of wine." "Pick up that philosopher and vendor of wine," said the Marquis, throwing him another gold coin, "and spend it as you will. The horses there, are they right?" Without deigning to look at the assemblage a second time, Monsieur the Marquis leaned back in his seat, and was just being driven away with the air of a gentleman who had accidentally broken some common thing and had paid for it, and could afford to pay for it, when his ease was suddenly disturbed by a coin flying into his carriage and ringing on its floor. "Hold!" said Monsieur the Marquis. "Hold the horses! Who threw that?" He looked to the spot where Defarge, the vendor of wine, had stood a moment before, but the wretched father was grovelling on his face on the pavement. In that spot, and the figure that stood beside him, was a figure of a dark, stout woman knitting. "You dogs!" said the Marquis, but smoothly, and with an unchanged front, except as to the spots on his nose. "I would ride over any of you willingly, and exterminate you from the earth if I knew which rascal threw at the carriage. And if that brigand were sufficiently near it, he should be crushed under the wheels." So cowed was their condition, and so long and so hard their experience of what such a man could do to them, within the law and beyond it, that not a voice, or a hand, or even an eye was raised, among the men not one, but the woman who stood knitting looked up steadily, and looked at the Marquis in the face. It was not for his dignity to notice it. His contemptuous eyes passed over her and over all the other rats. He leaned back in his seat again and gave the word, "Go on," and we'll pause there.